All right, welcome to this session. I'm glad all of you were here to hear me out. I know the session is on a Sunday at 3 p.m., so I'm going to try and keep this as simple and as interesting as possible. I can't promise this is going to be a short session. All right, let's start. Before we begin, today I'm going to talk about a very interesting APT called Lazarus. For those of us that don't know about Lazarus, it's affiliated with North Korea. So what better thing to do on a Sunday afternoon than talk about a North Korean APT, right? An APT that we all love and cherish. Before we begin, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Asheer Malhotra. I'm a threat researcher at Cisco Talos, and I specialize in malware analysis, threat intelligence, and malware detection techniques. This is my second time speaking at BSidesCharm, so yay. All right, thank you. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. All right, on the agenda today, we are first going to talk about who and what Lazarus is. Then we're going to talk about a specific campaign that Lazarus conducted over the course of the past year in 2022. I know there's some new disclosures in 2023 as well. I'm not going to present on that, but I'm certainly going to talk to you about that if you guys want me to. So as part of this campaign that we disclosed from back in 2022, we discovered the kill chain that I'm going to illustrate today, and I'm going to talk about their playbook as well. I will give you specific examples of hands-on keyboard activity that the operators from this APT group are known to perform. Now, Lazarus really likes building implants. They build customized implants all the time. And I'm going to talk about 3 specific implants. I promise it's going to be just 3 or maybe more. But these 3 implants were pivotal to the success of their campaign. And I'm going to describe these 3 implants over the course of 3 different intrusion sets, which were all part of the same campaign. Then we're going to end with some key takeaways and some summary slides, because I was told I have to do that. So. All right, first things first. How many of you know what Lazarus is? Very good. For those of us that don't know what Lazarus is, all right, hold on. How many of you know what an APT group is? Sweet. All right. So for those of us that don't know what an APT group is, it's called an Advanced Persistent Threat. It's a state-sponsored hacking group that usually has the support and funding of a government organization or a government that belongs to a specific country. And they perform a variety of attacks, all working towards the benefit of a specific nation state. Lazarus in particular, also known as Hidden Cobra, APT38 sometimes, Zinc also sometimes, has been affiliated with North Korea by the industry far and wide. It's been active since at least 2010. In terms of their goals, they have a 3-pronged approach. They either conduct their campaigns to perform espionage, or for financial gain, or to conduct disruptive attacks. When it comes to the victimology of Lazarus, everything is on the table. All organizations are on the table. They love to go after military organizations, civilian government entities, finance, media verticals, critical infrastructure, anything that they can get their hands on. In terms of their distribution TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, throughout the course of the past decade or so, Lazarus has been known to use a variety of techniques to distribute their malware. This includes spear phishing attacks, social engineering people, exploitation of known vulnerabilities, and then most recently, they decided to get into the supply chain attack game as well, this year. In terms of their malware and tooling, they love to create new malware all the time. There's almost like 1 implant every year. I'm going to talk about 3 of their implants that we saw recently: MagicRAT, YamaBot, and vSingle, and I'm going to describe that over the course of 3 intrusion sets. That being said, they also like to use a lot of open source tools and a lot of post-exploitation frameworks that are readily available out in the wild. And I'm going to give a brief introduction about how they use it and what kind of tools they like to use. All right, let's talk about the campaign. So this campaign that we discovered back in early 2022, and it made its way well into late 2022 as well, was used to target energy companies all across the world, the United States, North America, and parts of Asia as well. It consisted of 3 distinct intrusion sets. Well, not distinct, they were very similar in the way they were deployed. But the key difference here was the implants, the final payloads that were being distributed as part of each intrusion set. In the first intrusion set, we saw an implant called vSingle being deployed onto infected endpoints. This was an instance where only vSingle was deployed. I'm going to talk about vSingle as well, but I just wanted to give you guys an introduction about it. And vSingle was extensively used for performing hands-on keyboard activity, for searching for stuff, enumerating stuff, pivoting, lateral movement, so on and so forth. In the second intrusion set, we saw the use of vSingle along with another malware family called MagicRAT. And when we discovered MagicRAT, it was previously undisclosed, so this was something new. And if you don't like the name, you can blame me for it, because I was the one who named it. So don't clap, don't encourage me. So what we saw in this intrusion set was that, first of all, vSingle was deployed, and then the attackers, for some reason, decided that they didn't want to use vSingle, and that made way for MagicRAT. And then MagicRAT became the de facto mechanism for long-term persistent access into that specific network. In the third intrusion set, we saw the use of vSingle along with yet another malware implant called YamaBot. Now, this was not by choice. The deployment of YamaBot was not by choice. As soon as they deployed vSingle, it was detected. They were like, oh, crap, we got to find something else. So that is when they brought in YamaBot, and they started using that specific piece of malware for long-term persistent access. All right, let's go back now. Let's see how this entire CyberKit chain works and how this infection chain works. It all started with the exploitation of public-facing vulnerable VMware servers. They exploited the Log4j vulnerability. You guys remember Log4j? All right. And that successful exploitation of the VMware servers then led to the establishment of a reverse shell. They performed some preliminary tasks, and then they went on to deploy customized implants. These customized implants were, as I said, vSingle, MagicRAT, and YamaBot. Then they decided to start instrumenting the custom implants to carry out a variety of activities on the infected endpoints and in the infected organizations. This included creation of backdoor user accounts, creating reverse tunnels, lateral movement, data exfiltration, and so on and so forth. So basically the whole deal. Now, before we get into the typical infection chain, I just want to present it a different way. I want to talk about disabling defenses. In this day and age, it sounds very rudimentary, but it's an essential step that threat actors across the world, any mature threat actor across the world, certainly does in one form or the other. And that's what Lazarus did as well. They try to get information about antivirus products, and then they try to disable real-time monitoring, try to create exclusions, and so on and so forth. It's just preliminary tasks that they want to do before they actually introduce their custom-built precious implants on an infected endpoint. All right, this is again what a typical infection chain looks like. The reason why I wanted to show you this diagram is because they didn't just use their customized implants for performing malicious activities on an endpoint. They also used a variety of open source tools, something like Impact. And the reason why they used it is because between the custom implants and the open source tools, there's like a 50-50 split in terms of capabilities. Something that the customized implant can do, the open source tool may not be able to do, and vice versa. Something that the open source tool can do, the implant might not be able to do. So they basically tried to make this a symbiotic relationship and work both these components in conjunction with each other in order to carry out a number of different activities. All right, let's talk about vSingle first. The reason I want to talk about vSingle is because we saw a lot of hands-on capability activity being performed via vSingle. Now, vSingle is a malware family. It's basically a rat family that on first look looks like another Lazarus family called DTRACK, and DTRACK is very popular with Lazarus. They use it in a plethora of campaigns against different entities all across the world. And when I started analyzing this, I realized that this is probably DTRACK, and then I started to peel across the layers and everything, and then we found out that this was in fact vSingle, which is a completely different implant from DTRACK. DTRACK has two major categories of capabilities. The first one is that it can create a reverse shell. It's going to basically spawn a command.exe, cmd.exe process. It's going to start talking to it via named pipes, and anything that it writes and reads, it can send out to the command and control server. This is a very basic reverse shell, and this has been very popular for the longest time. We've seen these kind of reverse shells from the days of APT1 as well. Another functionality that vSingle has is that it has the ability to deploy plugins. And when I say plugins, that means additional payloads. In this case, vSingle was able to deploy additional payloads in the form of in-memory shellcode. It goes out to the C2 server and it says, hey, I need something to run in my process's memory, and they'll send it shellcode that it runs inside of its own process. And then it also had the ability to run certain different types of scripts, so VB scripts, Java scripts, and PowerShell scripts, I guess, that it could get from the server and start to execute on the infected endpoint. The use of plugins is, and this is something of note if you've been following Lazarus for as long as I have, the use of plugins in customized implants is very typical of Lazarus. They like to do this. They like to have a modular structure, and we've seen this in the past as well. Sometimes some of their plugins are also ransomware, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, so we have vSingle installed on the system. What happens next, right? The attackers have compromised the box. They've done their preliminary actions. They've disabled protections. They've deployed vSingle. What happens next? What happens next is a series of hands-on keyboard activity. The first thing they do is they perform additional reconnaissance, the usual sysconfig, ipconfig, they query the user accounts, they try to enumerate directories to find a list of installed programs, they even run the time command to get an idea of what the time zone is, and so on and so forth. Basically, this is an attempt to fingerprint and profile the system before they take any further actions on it. If they think that the system is worth having access to, they will start creating mechanisms for, alternate mechanisms for maintaining that access. And what they basically do is they will create reverse shells, and they will also start creating backdoored user accounts, which they will then give administrative privileges, so that in case their customized implant is burnt, or if it's not able to talk to the command and control server, they don't have to reinfect the box all over again. They already have access, and they might just be able to RDP into it. They also, in the course of this campaign, Lazarus also had a very special focus on harvesting credentials. So they would use the VSS command utility to get a shadow volume copy, and then they would extract the ntds.dit file, and they would just exfiltrate it out using their customized implant. NTDS is a file that contains Active Directory information, including a lot of credentials as well. So that's something that they can extract out of the NTDS file and then use their own time to crack those passwords, or exploit it via pass the hash. Oops, sorry. And then, of course, they have the lateral movement. If they are interested in the network, they will start performing lateral movement. And in order to do that, they will do a ton of Active Directory reconnaissance. The commands here are mostly querying the system and the Active Directory to find information about the users and the domain and the computers and stuff like that. And then they will use something like impacket or psexec to pivot off and get on another box, and so on and so forth. They will just go on and on and on. Am I going too fast? All right, cool, perfect. So I'm going to talk about YamaBot next. This was seen in intrusion set 3, remember? So basically what we've done up till now is we've talked about intrusion set 1, and we've talked about a lot of hands-on keyboard activity. I don't want to talk about victim 2 yet. I want to talk about victim 3, first of all. In victim 3, we saw the usage of YamaBot, and it was a very clear match. The samples that we found were YamaBot. They were attributed to Lazarus by the Japanese CERT, I think in 2022 as well. It's a very typical rat malware family. There's nothing very special about it, but it consists of a lot of features that you see in a lot of commodity rats out there in the wild. It's also Golang based, so that gives us an indication that Lazarus likes to experiment with different platforms and different frameworks, and that is what brings us to MagicRAT. All right, I'm going to take a moment for you to look at that really cool graphic that my graphics team made. It looks magical, right? All right, so MagicRAT. MagicRAT was first created in April 2022, and then subsequently we saw it being deployed a month later in May 2022. What was really, really interesting about this malware family is that it uses the Qt framework. Do you all know what the Qt framework is? All right, I'm going to tell you what the Qt framework is after some time. Not yet. Basically, what it did was it would take this framework, the software development framework, and it would statically link that framework into its own binary. So there's like an entire framework that's embedded inside an exe file or a DLL file. And that makes it like more than a few megabytes, to be honest. It's like a huge file. MagicRAT extensively used the Qt framework, which they used the settings and configuration mechanism in the Qt framework to hold different configurations. The first set of configurations that you see, I know it's a little small, but it's basically a preamble followed by base64 encoded C2 URLs that the rat actually goes out and talks to. And then these settings also and these configurations also store the replies from the command and control server and victim identification information and so on and so forth. In terms of persistence, MagicRAT is very simple. It has the ability to create scheduled tasks on the system. It also has the ability to create a link file, a shortcut file in the startup folder. Very simple, to be honest. Its C2 communication is also very, very simple. C2 is command and control server. Basically, it sends out a beacon and says, hey, I'm alive. I'm going to send you some more information about this box, and then you tell me what I need to do after that. And that's basically as simple as it gets. It's HTTP based, so it's not really very complicated, the communication. In terms of capabilities, it's a feature-rich rat, but it's also very simple. It has the ability to download and execute files. It can exfiltrate data. It can self-delete itself. It can create a remote shell. You remember I spoke about the reverse shells in vSingle? It's very similar. It has a very similar capability. It also has the capability to switch between command and control servers. So the command and control server will send it a new value and say, hey, you got to stop talking to me now, and you now have to talk to a new server. And the rat is going to be like, all right, cool. I'm just going to switch over communications. And basically, that's how it works. All right, let's talk about the Qt framework. So the Qt framework is advertised as a cross-platform framework for creating a variety of applications. It's a very popular framework when it comes to creating graphical user interface-based applications, desktop applications, and it's extremely, extremely popular, to be honest. How many of you have used Ollie Debug? Yeah, Ollie Debug, I think, uses the Qt framework in some form or the other. The advantage that the Qt framework brings to a malware, I don't want to say that, but now I can't find better words, is that, or to the developer of a specific application, is that it allows the developer to be agnostic of the platform, the underlying platform. For example, Windows APIs or Linux or Mac OS calls. And all the developer has to do is understand and figure out how the Qt framework works and how to call the Qt framework's APIs instead of calling the platform's APIs. And that's all they need to do. And then that also gives the developer the ability to port their applications and to port their code to different platforms. They just have to write code once, and then they can compile it for Windows, Linux, macOS, and so on and so forth. This is an example of the malware of MagicRAT using network calls to communicate with its C2 server. And then this is an example of the process creation mechanism that it uses. I know I don't understand it either, to be honest. And I'm the one who analyzed it, so. All right, so that brings us to the question, why would they use the Qt framework? Are there certain advantages to using the Qt framework? And I'm not advertising using this in malware, by the way, all right? The very first advantage that the attackers have is that it makes my life more difficult. It makes researcher analysis way more cumbersome, especially if you have like an 8 megabyte exe and you have to sift through different lines of code and figure out what is a library and what is user code. And then in turn, you have to figure out how the APIs work and how the structures are structured and stuff like that. It's also designed to be highly performant. I don't really think the attackers cared about that, but they did use the multi-threading implementation to have different threads talk to each other. Qt is also highly portable, as I said. So we believe that the intention was to create MagicRAT and then deploy it, have it ready for deployment on Windows, Linux, and macOS, wherever the attackers saw fit. So far, we've only seen a Windows version of it. I might be wrong here. Also, as defenders, we have to ask this question. Is this an evasion mechanism? Is the Qt framework an evasion mechanism? How many of you have seen the Qt framework being used in malware? I've never seen it being used in the malware. You seen it? All right. So there is also the possibility that the Qt framework was included. MagicRAT was built on the Qt framework to evade heuristic detection mechanisms. There's always that possibility as well. All right, so we've spoken about 3 rats, and I promised I wouldn't talk about another rat, but I have to. So far, we've talked about vSingle and Yamabot and MagicRAT. And there is yet another rat. Did I tell you that Lazarus loves creating new implants? TigerRAT is yet another implant that we discovered that had infrastructure overlap with MagicRAT. Basically, we found a C2 server for MagicRAT that also hosted TigerRAT. TigerRAT is a tried and tested implant. It was disclosed by the South Korean government in 2021. It's very feature-rich in terms of its capabilities. It has the ability to screen capture and keylog, and it has a full-fledged file management module in there. It has the ability to create, destroy, read, write, execute files, and so on and so forth. What's peculiar about TigerRAT is that in spite of having a full-fledged file management module, it also has the ability to look for certain files on the system with certain extensions and send that out to the C2 server and enables it to exfiltrate it. And this is kind of sort of a duplicity of functionality that we've seen in rats, authored by Lazarus. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit as well. But basically what happens is if you followed implants created by Lazarus over the past 5 years or so, they love to stitch together different functionalities in their rats and in their malware families. So you might not be able to derive a linear evolution in their malware families. They tend to take things out, put things back, and stuff like that. And this is an example of that. TigerRAT was disclosed in 2021, but it was first made in 2020. A bulk of its functionality was introduced in 2020. In 2021, we saw the attackers add the port forwarding capability. And then in 2022, they immediately decided to remove it. They introduced a new capability that allows the malware to copy over or dump the contents of a removable file. And then we also saw indications that they were preparing to add a web capture module in there as well in the malware implant. All right, how are we doing on time? Good. All right. All right. This might just be a short presentation. All right. Let's summarize everything. So what are the key takeaways? I've just dumped a ton of information on you and have been like, hey, this is a campaign. These are 3 intrusion sets. These is 4 malware implants. And, that's it. But I'd like to summarize this a bit and give it more structure. So here it is. When we looked at the implants, there were certain things that stood out to us. There were certain patterns that we saw. Firstly, in this specific campaign, we saw implants that were rapidly developed. There were 4 different types of implants that were developed. There were other customized modules and plugins that the attackers developed on a regular basis that they could deploy on the infected endpoints. We have seen the increasing use of obfuscation and the use of loaders in Lazarus's implants over the past 3 or 4 years. And that practice has continued well into 2023 as well. Of course, Lazarus also likes to mix and match their capabilities. As I said, they will stitch together different code and create an implant that suits a specific campaign or a specific intrusion set. And then Lazarus is also moving towards a platform agnostic approach. They're basically trying to create one single piece of malware, see if it's really effective, and then port it to different platforms and different operating systems as and when they see fit. Now, this is something that I haven't spoken about a lot, but they do like to use a lot of readily available tools. They will use Impacket on a very regular basis. They will use MimikATTs. They will use ProcDump. They will use archive creation tools for data exfiltration and so on and so forth. And they will use known tools such as reverse tunnels and proxies and the 3 proxies and the p-links and stuff like that to conduct their malicious operations. All right, this is probably going to be the last slide. Yay. All right, so to summarize, Lazarus is bad. All right. Now, this is a highly, highly motivated adversary that is constantly trying new things. They're constantly innovating. They will not shy away from the use of exploits. So it's not just social engineering. They have a very diverse set of implants and arsenals in their arsenal. They like to use a lot of open source tools as well and perform a wide variety of hands-on keyboard activity. And so when you look at this slide, this presentation, and when you take a look at this, they're a very motivated adversary, right? And one would even say that they're a very sophisticated adversary as well. And sometimes we say that they're experts at what they do, but sometimes they're not. In this campaign, we found multiple instances, but I want to talk about 2 instances here where they basically made mistakes. Firstly, in the hands-on keyboard activity, they would mistype commands. And every time you mistype a command, you have to type it in again, right? So that creates a lot of noise on the system. So, maybe they weren't paying attention, maybe they didn't have their coffee or whatever, but sometimes that happened. In another instance, we also saw that sometimes the operator that had access to a compromised box would type in a command, figure out that it's not working, disappear for like 5 minutes, and then come back and put in the right command. Can you guess what they were doing in those 5 minutes? Yes, they were Googling shit. All right. And then this is my third observation, and this is kind of analytical. We noticed a specific pattern in their operations and their hands-on keyboard activity. On some certain endpoints, we would see a predefined set of commands being executed day after day after day, on consecutive days. And what I figured was it was probably because there were multiple operators getting access to the same box. So one operator gets access to a compromised box today, and then that gets transferred to another operator, and then that gets transferred to another operator day after day because they had persistent access. And the reason why they ran the same set of commands is because they had the same playbook. It was basically a standard operating procedures manual, a SOP manual that said at the very beginning, when you get access to a compromised box, run these commands, right? So they ran their own set of commands, but they wouldn't compare notes is what I feel happened, because they would repeatedly execute the same set of commands. So basically one operator doesn't know what the other operator found out, which again makes it noisy, which also shows that there is a certain level of immaturity in their operations as well. So there are indications that although we tend to create like cool graphics and we tend to call different adversaries bears and kittens and leopards and tigers and pandas, they are human at the end of the day, and they do make mistakes. And that's what I'm going to leave you with today. How are we doing on time? Doing good? All right. So this is the end of my presentation. Now is the time for any questions, feedback, blessings, beer that you might have for me. So one of them was the repeated use of the same set of commands, which led me to believe that you've already typed this command, you already have this information. Why would you come back tomorrow and do the same thing again, right? And then the day after tomorrow as well, right? So that led me to believe that there were two different distinct human individual operators operating the box. And the biggest thing is they weren't talking to each other. Maybe it was office politics or whatever, but they're just not talking to each other. So.
You said that you weren't going to get into detail about what you've seen this year. Since we've got a little bit of time, is there any changes that you've seen to Lazarus 2023, or is it very similar to Lazarus 2022?
Well, there are indications that they've gotten into the supply chain attack game, I've heard. So. I think this is related to 3CX and Xtrader, and that's all I can talk about, to be honest. Questions?
I saw an IP address on one of your screenshots. Do they use DNS, IP, and from what region are they usually attacking from?
I don't remember, to be honest. They tend to mix and match their infrastructure as well. They're very paranoid about their infrastructure as well. And this goes for most of the North Korean APTs, nation-state groups. As soon as you find stuff on VirusTotal, they tend to remove that as soon as they can, unless they've had a certain degree of success, or sometimes they just don't care. Yeah.
So I'm an expert on North Korean traffic, so probably not your core audience. I just want to say your work on this is fantastic. You did an amazing job on the blog.
Thank you. Thank you. He said my work was fantastic. I'm just kidding.
I think you mapped out the MITRE techniques for defenders to map their defenses against. It's fantastic for a lot of those. Is there any chance you'd be willing to more specifically define your groups than Lazarus, which describes a whole bunch of different actors with wildly different techniques and habits?
I can try, but it's going to take a year or so. So the question is there any way we can get into more granularity when it comes to talking about Lazarus? Is that the question?
Yes, if I can help you with that, please.
Okay. Sure. Then it's going to take you a year to do that. So the problem here is that Lazarus, recently the term Lazarus has, it's people are starting to use it to define an umbrella of threat actors that are associated with North Korea. And that creates a problem because sometimes you need a greater detail and attribution. And when certain people or certain researchers, like me, admittedly, don't know who the actual entity is, we just call it Lazarus and we get done with it. And that dilutes the actual Lazarus moniker, to be honest. I get you. Trust me, they had a lot of systems to practice on. The volume and the time period, they had more than enough time to explore around.
This is like great information. Where can we find the evolution of this information or additional info about other APTs in the next year or so? Is there any place that we can go after?
Yeah, we publish research on our blog as well. I'm sorry, I should have put that in right here. It's blog.talosintelligence.com. So that's basically it. I apologize for that. I should have put something in. Sure. So firstly, what happened was when we got our hands on the samples, they were more than a few megabytes, 8 or 9 megabytes. And the first question you have to ask yourself is, why is this malware so big, right? Maybe it's made in Golang, or maybe it's made in a different framework. And then, we did our own static analysis, and we started to find that, once you open it up in IDA Pro and you look at the strings, you slowly start to understand that this subword or this substring Qt is being used a lot. And then you start Googling stuff, and you eventually stumble upon the fact that, oh, this is the Qt framework. And when you start looking at the code that they're calling, I think Qt framework is an open source framework, so you can have a direct match between the assembly that you're looking at and the code that's uploaded out there. So that's basically how we discovered it. I wish we hadn't, but any more questions? Going once. Going twice. All right. You got a question? Yes. All right. Sold. All right. No take backs. Thank you so much for attending this session. You guys are awesome. Thanks.